So pretty much, blood work was taken every day, and they usually came in the middle of the night, so that they could get to the lab, and the doctors would have the results back by that morning when they did their rounds. And most of the time, it was maybe one or two tubes. But one night, they took 13 tubes of blood during the night. This was becoming an issue for me because my IVs were in, plus they were trying to find veins just to draw blood. And at one point, I actually had two IVs because some of the antibiotics I was being given were incompatible and couldn't go through the same IV line. So I was starting to have issues with their ability to even find veins to draw blood. But the Lord answered prayer there too, and they were always able to get what they needed, even though my arms looked like they had been in a war zone. That wasn't their fault. It's just the nature of who I am. But all this blood work was being, again, they were constantly drawing blood to see if they could gain any insight into what was causing the problem. And so, like I said, there was blood drawn pretty much every single day to some degree.
And this is where having the Christian doctor helped, because he recommended that we add that issue, the problem of the IV lines, to our prayer team.
Because they were very concerned that they were really going to run out of veins. At one point, they realized they were going to have to call the ultrasound people, which I didn't even know that was an issue or an option. So there's a team, they come in, and with an ultrasound, they find the deep veins, the veins that you just can't get with your eyes. And that's how I was able to continue with my IVs. And even finding those deep veins, they had to come in, it was at least 3 or 4 times and redo, because veins were not meant to have an IV in it for 16 days. And so basically my veins were saying we're done, and they would just have to find a new one. They also had to be very careful because some of the antibiotics could be toxic. And if the veins started to go, then the antibiotic would infiltrate into my arm. And that only happened once because the nurses were very, very diligent and very careful about checking my arms and IVs. They did not neglect that. And there was only one time where they actually had to give me some extra injections because one of the IVs did infiltrate. And so there were no real issues with that. So again, so thankful, not just for how much loving care I got from the nurses, but they were technically exceptional in what they did, and I did appreciate that. So on Friday, they wanted to do a CT of my abdomen and pelvis, and they called it with contrast, which meant I had to drink. It was about a gallon of something. I don't know what I drank, but it was a gallon of some liquid. And they did the CT, but I didn't go back to my room after the CT. They said, ophthalmology wants you right now. Well, ophthalmology obviously is kind of controlling everything because this was an eye issue, and they saw me every day. The only exception would be on the weekend. Typically, they maybe saw me one day. They didn't see me both days on the weekends, but they saw me every day to do at least an hour's worth, sometimes a little bit more, of exams. They would take pictures. They did ultrasounds of my eye, and then they did physical exams, and the doctors would look at me. And this was every day because they were trying to see if they were seeing improvement or worsening. They were trying to get to the point where they could actually see the back of my eyes. They needed to see the back of my eyes in order to determine damage. Because at that point, if I'm not mistaken on this, Paul, they couldn't really even see my retina.
Correct.
Yeah. And that was very...
they were working, to use an expression, they were working blind.
Yeah. And they couldn't tell. So if there was a problem with my retina, they couldn't see it. So they were desperately trying to figure out, or to daily look to see that if they could see something that would help them know how to move forward. So they initially were making plans for a second round of injections in my eyes to continue again with the antibiotic, antifungal, antiviral treatments. And so they took me down, and they told me they were going to do this, and they went ahead and deadened my eyes. But between the deadening and the waiting for it to take hold, test results came back from some other tests they had run. And you can explain this probably better than I.
So they information that's needed to determine what's the next step in ultimately trying to determine what's the cause. One of the questions is, are the cells that might be involved, for example, is it bacteria? Is it a virus? If those cells are around, they can run tests for those. But if they've been killed, and one of the possibilities was the agents, the antibiotics or antiviral agents that have been injected into the eye may have done their job, in which case you would not find the living organism, but you might find dead remnants. Those can be taken, and fragments of those can be tested through a technique called PCR. However, that's not done at OSU. Those are sent out to a laboratory that does that extensively. Some of that data came back during the time while they were waiting for the anesthetic to take over and before they would actually do the injection.
And what they found out was that there was no evidence that there was any living viruses, and so they didn't have to inject me, which was a relief for me and for them, because they didn't want to necessarily do things that weren't necessary. So that was just another timing issue, the timing of that test coming back and them getting it, information, right then was just a God thing. God was very much ordering the steps of everything and orchestrating everything. He was the maestro, of this whole orchestra, and he was in control. So we didn't have to have the injections, but they did continue with the examination, and the ophthalmologist found that the swelling had been reduced, which was very encouraging. So the inflammation in my eyes was going down, and they said it was small, but it was going in the right direction, and they were happy for small. That was going to be okay. During this time, a young man that had been one of Paul's students, and he had also been in our mentoring group while he was at Mount Vernon Nazarene University. He was currently in his 4th year of residency in ophthalmology in Dayton. And when he heard about me, he came out to visit. And
he became a professional consultant because he spent a few hours with us that evening, and Dylan explained to us many of the things what the procedures would be like, and even predicted in anticipation of what, if they found A, then they would do these steps. If they found B, they do these steps. And so when those things happened, we realized this is normal. Now, the whole situation's abnormal, but we weren't in this situation of, well, maybe they're just guessing. Maybe they're just trying things. These are the standard procedures, and it gave us a lot of confidence. It also meant that if we had a question, we could contact Dylan, and he would answer any question that we had. He did mention that he had worked with someone that was with the OSU residency program, but I didn't remember the name. And as it turned out, once we got farther down the road, it turned out the surgeon that Dylan worked with was the surgeon that worked on Judy, the second case. And he's currently the one handling Judy's case. So here's another example of how God brings people into this situation that know each other and can affirm information. And the result was, with Dylan helping us, we got a lot of information to be able to understand how the doctors were gathering information, how they would analyze it, how they would process it, and then how they make decisions to go forward. So it gave us a lot of confidence.
And in Dylan's words, he told us this, even later, that this surgeon that he worked with, he said, is one of the smartest people he's ever known. And if he ever needed someone to cut on his eye, it'd be that guy. And so that gave us a lot of confidence later when we found out that Dr. Bergstrom was going to actually be my surgeon. So that was, again, very, very, very helpful.